Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lore Watch. I mean, wait a minute. No, this is the main show. Welcome to the Blizzard Watch podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Joe Perez. With me is my stalwart companion and partner in crime, Liz Harper. How you doing today, Liz?
Hello, I am doing great. I just drank an energy drink, so I am super hyped for podcasting tonight.
Hype for podcast. Let's go. Now, you may have noticed that I'm on hosting duties, which means that Matt's not here today. And in lieu of that, with that large of a personality, we went to the well and found two willing people to try to help us out. Now, first, you've definitely heard them before. Cory's joining us again, so say hi, Cory.
Hi, Cory. Well, I heard that there was a quota of writers from Edmonton that you needed per podcast of at least one. So here I am to fill in.
It's true. It's
a weird rule, but I don't make it,
It's just the way it's always been, and thus it always shall be. And joining us as well, which she's been on the main show a few times with us, particularly in our BlizzCon roundups. Words are hard today, people. It's been a very long day. It's our other Liz, Patt. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for bringing me on to talk about all things Blizzard and some things that aren't.
Yeah, we've definitely been expanding the show, and I think that's actually a good segue to start with our first topic. Well, friends, not all things last forever, because that would be really weird. And one thing that definitely got shuttered today is Game Informer. Now, some of you may remember this as the little magazine that could back in the day, produced by GameStop, when all the video game mags were the rage back in like the early 2000s, I want to say. I think it was right around like 2003-ish, something like that. It was right around the time that we really started doing stuff. Go ahead.
The magazine is 33 years old.
Oh!
Or it
We're
was
old.
33 years old. We are old.
That's a hot
just
minute
gotta
right
admit
there.
it. We're old. We're old.
Oh my
now.
god! Why did I think it was 23, not 33?
I believe that is when GameStop acquired them from FuncoLand.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, there we learned a thing today. Well, I guess it only got to live to the ripe old Middle Ages there, because it's no longer with us. So, I mean, it was a website. It was a popular gaming magazine for quite a while. To be fair, I'm kind of surprised it was still around. Not the website portion, but reading through this, the magazine was still in publication. What?
Yeah.
Which is rare for a video game focused mag. Like, I feel like I don't see any of those anymore.
Certainly
Maybe
not. I mean,
PC Gamer, maybe?
Maybe. I'm not sure, but some of those were practically collectibles. I'm pretty sure I have a Game Informer from when Mass Effect 3 came out with a custom cover, and it was super cool. It's probably in a box.
Yeah, or they, I remember, what is it, Resident Evil 4? That was a big one for them. You're saying, Liz?
Don't y'all remember you'd go out and you'd buy PC Gamer or you'd buy a Game Informer just to get the CD of video game demos? You remember those days? Yeah. Yes. I mean, and it's like that. It feels like the gaming magazine's time has passed. Not that that makes it any less tragic that this has been shut down and all of these people have been laid off, because I mean, this was good coverage. This was good game coverage out there, and now there's a little bit less of it.
The thing I find most fascinating about it was it really legitimately the continuing of the physical publication. And the reason I say that is paper and printing has become exceedingly expensive over the course of just the last 5 years. We've seen it shoot up with the global shortage of paper that happened during the pandemic because of paper production. We've seen it with the enhanced focus on conservation of resources, particularly trees and other products used to make print media. We've seen all that sort of decrease, and really an emphasis push further into the digital space, moving towards more like a purely digital experience. I would have thought that after all the ups and downs that GameStop had, that they would have maybe made that transition, if nothing else, to save themselves some money. So, like, did you even know that these were still in physical production?
No, I don't think
I
remember the last time I stepped into a GameStop.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. And I mean, and to be fair, it was actually a very decent magazine for its time, to the point where it had plenty of exclusives. And one of them, which is an interesting one, and I forget which of you mentioned it, but go ahead now and talk about it. Didn't they have a whole bunch of stuff lined up for Dragon Age the Veilguard?
From what I heard, this is apocryphal. I didn't dig down the rabbit hole on this, so don't quote me on this if it turns out not to be true.
Oh, we're quoting you. This is recorded.
Oh man. But from what I had been told, there was a big chunk of Veilguard pre-release interviews and exclusive content that was for Game Informer, that was exclusive to Game Informer. And now with no Game Informer, that is likely all sitting in the ether somewhere, where it just will not exist.
Yeah, I guess issue 367, which is supposed to be the featured issue of for Dragon Age the Veilguard, will be the last physical issue ever printed.
Oh, okay. So maybe it will still have some of that, but good luck trying to find that online.
Yeah, I mean, or, maybe this is your cue to try to rush it and pick one of those magazines as a collector's item, as it's a kind of an iconic moment with I hate to say it like that, but it's a milestone, right?
Are we going to have to run out and find a place that sells physical magazines? Where do I even go for one of those?
You go into GameStop.
You go to GameStop. And along the way, you got to trade in 5 AAA titles that just came out a week ago to get one magazine. Or maybe one quadruple A title. Let's see if Skull and Crossbones is sitting on your shelf.
And to be fair, we've talked about this a lot too. This seems like I don't want to say a changing of the times, but because it doesn't feel purely like that. Because the website's going away as well. The website is gone as of the time of this recording. So there wasn't even a pivot point. It was just done, shuttered, and there's just no more. Whereas we're in this business as well. Obviously, you're listening to the podcast. Chances are very likely, if you've listened to this podcast, you visited our website at least once. A purely digital footprint has been a thing for quite a while, and is very successful in a lot of cases. I mean, other websites like Kotaku or others out there that exist and I'm blanking on all of them, but they seem to do fairly well, or at least well enough to stay afloat.
Polygon, IGN,
and they're still going to be around, it looks like. So I don't know. Do you think this? Go ahead.
I'm kind of surprised that GameStop didn't just go all digital. I mean, maybe it is GameStop, so maybe they just really had to cut the budget to nothing. But
yeah, but the problem is, have you been in it? You haven't been in a GameStop recently, right?
No, I try not to go into stop personally.
Very, very little in the way of actual physical games. Most of it is just tchotchkes and maybe refurbed phones or some refurbed consoles, maybe some used games, but everything is mostly focusing on digital codes or digital downloads. I remember buying something because I just randomly stopped into one, and it was a case, but it was a case with a digital code inside of it. It wasn't even a game disc. So there's been even
interesting.
It's even been a less sort of demand for the physical stuff, unless you want to buy a mushroom hat and pretend you're Toad from Mario or something like that. You can do that at GameStop. Or Funko Pops.
So many Funko Pops. You said Funko Pops, and we just need to emphasize there's so many Funko Pops.
That's really interesting to me because it almost feels like they're taking over, or they were trying to position themselves to take over the gap left from ThinkGeek. But I also did read that this was not quite the fully public death knell. Apparently in 2022, they actually tried to move to make it subscription only to GameStop. So they were commoditizing Game Informer as well as part of that GameStop Pro subscription, which kind of baffles me because I don't, when I think of gamers, we do love our collectibles, but I don't necessarily think of us collectively as a community of magazine fanatic.
No, but it was a part of an effort to continually try to incentivize that pro subscription. So I have a friend who's a store manager of a GameStop here, who surprisingly their store still does fairly well, even to them, right? They're still surprised by this, but they're going to ride it out as long as they can. it was definitely a move to like try to incentivize people as another thing. Like, look, you give us this money for pro and you get this extra thing. Because I remember originally, at least when I first was coming onto Game Informer back in the day, when it was, you know, it was part of that I forget they call it like the Player Plus program originally, before it was like pro. And like you got it and you got the magazine as a bonus, and then they started making its own thing when the splitting off. Tons of questionable decisions, but it was never a thing that people valued enough to actually make it worthwhile. And I know that GameStop still tries to incentivize its employees to sell X number of those subscriptions per day with the very limited staffing they're allotted. And I mean, I think GameStop is truly, honestly, on its death knell, or on its death's door yet again. Which is sad.
Well, as long as weird crypto bros want to prop it up, I'm sure it'll continue to exist in some form.
Maybe. We'll have to see.
Just depends on how diamond their diamond hands really are, and if that rocket does go to the moon. I know more words like that, but I haven't watched that Dan Olsen thing on it yet, so I can't comment further.
The only other thing that I want to do is scream stonks, but that's not helpful here. So yeah, if you were ever interested in Game Informer or any other video game magazine, now might be your last time to pick something up that is in an ever-dwindling market, and it might be worth it. Who knows? In 10 years from now, the final issue of a magazine might be worth something. It might be something you can leave to your kids or whatever the case is. I've seen weirder things walk into our shop that have an insane amount of value that I had no idea. So there you go. I think we can move on to some happier news here, or at least maybe not happier, depending on what you're into. But I think we're going to let Cory loose, because Cory always brings the heat when we talk about this. Cory, what's going on with Warcraft Rumble?
Oh, so much. That's it. There's so much happening. That's all I got.
Well, that's a Seinfeld episode in a nutshell. Go ahead.
Last time I talked was about 3 podcasts ago. We were heading into the new season with the Cenarian units, and I'm pleased to report that we're firmly in the new season with Cenarian units in the 3rd week of their fancy, fun festival event. And I'm really hoping that the 3rd week has turned things around, because oh boy, has the 2nd week come in and landed like a lead balloon. It has been just a slog, and that's nothing you want to hear about with your game. Hearing anything as a slog is not a fun time. They've been giving everyone a pre-made army that doesn't have any of the talents that make your units overpowered for your daily quests doing, and that has been no fun. The gameplay the Cenarian units themselves are fine, but they've also kind of landed like a lead balloon. I was initially excited for a lot of them because they have cool sounding abilities, and that's all you can really see on paper, and they can tell you how much health or how much damage they do, but until you really get your hands on something and watch it walk down the lane and run into a ghoul or an abomination, you don't really know how it's going to perform for you. And unfortunately, they are almost all overcost and underperforming. The Fairy Dragon continues to be excellent. The 2 leaders are pretty solid, and I'm happy to see them, Cenarius and Onu, the Ancient of Lore. And they're fun. They're fine, and they can be annoying to play against, and they can be fun to play with, but for the most part, the rest of the Cenarian units are not worth the gold it costs to play them, which is unfortunate. So I hope that we see some tweaks from Blizzard on that. For the rest of the event, though, it was actually a good few days right when you started of here's a bunch of things that you can do and goals and objectives to play with your new Cenarian units. And as you filled up those things, you got tickets for the festival, and you could buy a bunch of currencies and extra stars to upgrade your new Cenarian units. And it was a really fun thing to look at and see. I've got this big list of objectives to complete, and oh boy, is it fun to go through that list and cross things off. And it was a good couple days, but then you cross everything off except for the stuff that you can't do without spending a bunch of money, which brings us smack face first into a free-to-play monetization of Warcraft Rumble, which once again has reared its ugly head in they've just buffed their Molten Core. I know I'm careening wildly from one Rumble topic to another, but it all just kind of flows into each other because it's all it's all symptoms all the way down of this is a free to play game, and Warcraft Rumble is looking for its whales. They're looking for the people that will come in, look at the game, and say, you know what? I do have $20 to $30 sitting in my pocket that I would love to spend on making my scenarios just a tiny bit better. Not even the best. That's the problem, really. He's not even the best for $20 to $30. He's just a little bit better.
And I think that's always been sort of the problem with the mobile style games too, is like it's really easy for them to fall into that monetization trap of it's not even pay to win, it's pay to be slightly better in a lot of these cases, because they really want to try to like squeeze blood from a stone. And the free to play model sucks people in to try it, and then you wind up getting nickeled and dimed and bled for everything you have if you want to keep progressing at a regular rate. And I think that hurts a game. Like, at its core, Warcraft Rumble is a fun time. I think that's pretty safe to say, right, Cory?
Absolutely.
It is, and that's the thing that I find most annoying, because this last week, like, I just want to sit on my couch and half pay attention to my phone and half pay attention to a sitcom on my TV and just, like, play quests, because I love dropping little ghouls and little, grunts and troll witch doctors down. It's a satisfying feeling, and I don't care if I'm progressing or not, but at the same time, like, super progressing like a big whale would be, but I really want to feel like I'm at least having fun with that. And this last week of this is your army for the day and these repeatable quests that doesn't have any of the fun talents is bad. There's no way around it. Like, there's some workarounds where if you equip an army with all of the units that you might find in a pre-made army, and you give them talents that they'll feat, and the units in your pre-made will get those talents, but you can't cover all of them. So it's 6 out of 10 will have what you're looking for, which is a workaround, but it's still annoying, and I shouldn't have to do it.
And Liz, you've played Rumble as well. What are your thoughts on the gameplay overall?
I'm with both of y'all on this. I think it's a super fun game, but it is a grind. You hit a point where all you're doing is repeating the same maps over and over again because you're not beefy enough yet to take on the next level of maps. You're not beefy enough to do those dungeons and raids. So you just do a constant grind on whatever quests are available. And when you do a quest, it randomly upgrades one mob. And it's like, you do your quests, you hope it upgrades what you really want to be upgraded, and you keep doing that for eternity, it feels like. I really want to play Warcraft Rumble, but at the same time, every time I load it up, it's like, oh, I can't do any of the new content. I'm too low level. I can't advance in level because I'd have to spend hours grinding quests to go on and get up to the next levels of content, and it's just it is a game that is ruined by its monetization because it has been tuned for making money, not for having fun. And I think that's the big problem with free-to-play games, because they have to make money to survive, and that means you tune them to make people want to spend. And that's very frustrating when you just want to play a game. I
think there's a level of truth to that. Go ahead, Cory.
Especially when you look at their end game co-op activity, the PvE side anyways. PvP is, of course, just be the best PvPer that knows what the season's meta is going to be and have that leveled up and ready to go. And if you haven't been playing every day and maxing out your levels, odds are you're going to run into a whale who has spent money on the game, and they're just going to win because all their units have a level or two higher than you, which is unfortunate. But unless you play flawlessly, you're not going to beat the raw stat power. But on the PvE side of things, they've got Molten Core, and we all love raiding Molten Core. Obviously, we're here on the Blizzard Watch podcast. And I have played 3 times now with Mitch, our own esteemed Mitch. We hang out for an hour, and we hop on a Discord call, and we go raid Molten Core in Warcraft Rumble, which is super fun. Except, that's right. We don't all have Mitch has spent a little bit more money on the game than I have. He doesn't know how much, and I'm not going to try and guess. But so he could probably do a little better in a guild that was of like randos that have all spent money on the game than hanging out with a buddy and playing it. And also, you just get to a point where if you don't have the meta push, you don't get through Baron Geddon, or you don't get through Golemag. We've killed 4 out of 7 bosses of the Molten Core in Warcraft Rumble, and we've had fun doing it, but also we can point to that and be like, this is frustrating because the gameplay is set up in a way, and this is obviously a free-to-play decision to make sure you try and spend as much money to make your guys as strong as possible going into it. And they've even just buffed the difficulty on Molten Core, which is shocking. It was because guess what? The ability that does a percent of the boss's health as a spell execute was too strong against bosses. Who knew? So what was happening is players would get to Ragnaros and they plop Jaina down with her abilities that make your next spell stronger or cheaper, and they would just use execute on Ragnaros and defend until Ragnaros died. But they would use execute on every other fight with every other leader that they had to, because execute was too strong. So they nerfed execute, and they nerfed this cheese and this exploit. And the problem is that these fights and these maps in Warcraft Rumble kind of need these cheeses and exploits, or you have to spend money to have super leveled units.
Yeah, I think that's the trap, right? And it's not a free-to-play trap. It's a mentality specifically with how you set up your game, because arguably there have been absolutely massive successes in the free-to-play gaming space. One need look no further than games like League of Legends, Rocket League, even Fortnite, to throw those three games out there. And they tend to come up in succession when we talk about this particular game in general, as well as Overwatch and basically anything that Blizzard and Diablo Immortal, right? Like, they're freemium games or they're free-to-play games that come with a monetization scheme associated with it. And is monetization in those games a thing that they definitely cram home? Yes. But is it something that is pay to win? No, not usually. The cosmetics you get from those games are more about, you just buying something that's shiny or that you like it, not necessarily you need this in order to compete against other players, right? It's an even playing field otherwise. And I think that screams to their success, right? It's why players dump a ton of money into them. And I know, Cory, you and I have had talks in the past about like esports and why that matters. But even from just a regular player experience, it's an easy way to turn players off of your game by having them go into something, get paired with somebody who has spent more money than them into a game, thus out-level them, and thus have an imbalanced experience. And I'm curious why, for lack of a better term, Blizzard hasn't figured this out yet. Now, who's the developer on this one? It's which company?
It is Blizzard. It is a Blizzard game, as far as I...
Isn't it an association with another company, though?
I don't think so.
It's Diablo Immortal that was developed by NetEase.
Yeah.
This one's all Blizz.
They are obviously playing to a free-to-play kind of model, so it's real easy to see this is why they're making these decisions, and this is why we're seeing choices that would feel weird or strange in a like game that you've paid $20 for.
Yeah, and I mean, and to be clear, they do some things very good, or at least well in this one. Like we talked, the core gameplay can be satisfying. There's a really cool core concept here, and on a really selfish level, I really enjoy the fact that they make all of the models available for download so that you could 3D print them if you want to just have them laying around your house. Spoilers, I have several of them laying around my house.
They're super good. Like, this is every bit of design and every bit of art and every art asset in this game is worth its weight in gold. Like, this is a fantastic thing. And the designer that has taken all of these established Warcraft units and like toyified them should be applauded, and I'm so glad that they exist, and I would love to see more from them. And I was lucky enough to be at BlizzCon last year at 2023, and I got to sit in the room and ask, are we going to see any crossovers with other universes? Like, I would love to see a little Kerrigan and the little Zerglings and all that stuff. And they laughed and they said, never can't count that out, but we have no plans right now. And as we come up on the 1 year mark of Warcraft Rumble coming out, being released wide to the public, I was already playing it in Canada because we're special. I would like to see a bigger, or at least a roadmap, or maybe a like, hey, here's what's coming in the year ahead. Because right now we're in season, I want to say 7, and we've got 3 things coming down the pipe that we know about. We've gotten our raid. There's one more dungeon being added to the game in Scholomance. With the new Cenarion family out, we know that there's still a Dryad that hasn't been added to the gameplay that will exist. Molten Core has shown up. Ragnaros is a potential hero unit. If you can beat Ragnaros, which good luck, you need to have Chimeras and all these other units maxed as high as they can go. And so we're basically, that's it. Like, that's the roadmap that we know about. So we're in uncharted territory now. Warcraft Rumble needs to step up and say, hey, we are for sure going to be continuing to do this for another year with full developer support. This isn't going to become like Hearthstone Mercenaries or anything like that.
Well, speaking of Hearthstone, not to completely change gears here, but Liz, what is going on with Hearthstone?
Well, today Blizzard announced that Hearthstone Battlegrounds Season 8 is starting on August 20th. And, you know, Hearthstone just released an expansion in July, and I'm kind of like, okay, that's fine, whatever. But I love playing Battlegrounds. And every season they roll out Battlegrounds with some kind of new mechanic that sort of spices it up a little, makes it play a little differently. This time, the special mechanic is called Trinkets, which at twice during each game, you will be able to pick between a trinket, which is a buff that you will have for the entire game. And there are a lot of options. You can pick from 1 of 4. At turn 6, you can pick a lesser trinket, and there are 56 of them that you choose amongst randomly. And at turn 9, you pick a more powerful greater trinket. Again, there are 60 of those that you choose from randomly. It's a kind of a discover mechanic, if you're familiar with discover in Hearthstone, where you get a choice of 4 out of these 60, and you pick the one you want best. And this sounds really fun to me, because I think Hearthstone Battlegrounds, it's very randomized. It's an auto battler. You kind of never know how a game is going to play until you start playing. You randomly pick a hero. You have a few available for you to pick. And once you get in, each round you're presented with a random set of cards, and you pick which cards you want. But every game is different. And I think that's what I like about it so much, because you can go in and you can spend a few minutes playing. It is, unlike Warcraft Rumble, it is completely free to play. You cannot pay for power. You can only buy cosmetics. And this is just going to add a little bit more randomness and a little more strategy to each game, because twice a game you pick these buffs that you're going to have for the rest of the game, and that's going to inform how you build your deck, how it's going to inform maybe what kind of cards you want to use, and it's going to change the way the entire game plays. So I am looking forward to this, but then again, I always look forward to new Hearthstone Battleground seasons. But coming up on August 20th, which,
right around the corner.
Things. Yeah, it's right around the corner, but also, like, everything is happening that week. Blizzard kind of has a tendency to stack up everything all at once, so we're going to have Hearthstone Battlegrounds Season 8 that week. We are going to have something called World of Warcraft, The War Within Early Access starting. We're going to have Overwatch, the next Overwatch season. I don't remember the number of that one because there are so many season numbers floating around my head. So it's going to be a busy week for us at Blizzard Watch. But I'm going to ignore all that and play Hearthstone. I mean, what else would I play? I don't know.
Did you actually want to remember your August?
I know. Well, we've got this early part of August where we can do things, and then the rest of August is going to be a loss.
You've got the time before the War Within and the time after the War Within. Clearly, the War Within, as the start of the Whirlpool saga, is going to be the defining moment of World of Warcraft, and therefore the rest of our lives.
Yes, we're going to talk about that there, but I'm certain that we have never seen anything like this before. But we'll get there.
I'm looking at some of these example trinkets that are popping up in this Battlegrounds, in our Battlegrounds article, and I love the idea of, like, this is like the Dark Moon Fair tickets, except better, because they're permanent and not one-time things. So that was a fun thing. Battlegrounds has always been my favorite Hearthstone mode, and I'm excited to get my trinket on.
That's because it's the best Hearthstone mode, Cory. I mean,
It really
obviously.
is. I don't need to worry about building a deck. I can just start and play and see what I do, and then at the end of it, I've won or I'm playing again right away.
Also,
and if
I will
I've
say,
won, and then I play again right away.
one of these trinkets is the Yogg-tastic Pastry, which means that every turn you spin the wheel of Yogg-Saron. Which is as weird and wonderful as it sounds. It is a literal wheel that spins, and it stops on one random effect. Usually pretty good, not always what you want to happen. Like, one of them is it's gonna switch out all the cards in the tavern with different cards, and you're like, no, I froze that because I wanted to buy that. It's the most hilarious power to have. We've seen it before in a few different forms, but it looks like now it's going to be a trinket, and that doesn't matter what else is there. I'm always going to buy Yogg-Saron.
I have a really important question, though.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a Yogg-tastic pastry because it was made by an old god, or because it was made of an old god?
Yes.
It's kind of old. Yeah, that's probably the answer. It's sort of old god themed.
As is appropriate with old gods, all things are possible. Therefore, both options are theoretically correct. At least that's the way I'm choosing to view it.
All I know is I am ready to take a bite into that Yogg-tastic pastry.
I mean, you may not want to take a bite of it. I think they have teeth, so.
Well, speaking of things that might bite back, what's going on with Diablo 4? Because the demons, I hear they like to eat people sometimes.
They do.
There's some sort of butcher coming back, possibly, but he's a little bit more on fire.
So, season 5 launched today, right? Is that what's going on? Who wants to talk about that? Liz the Second, would you like to discuss anything with that?
I will dive right in.
Please.
Season 5 launched today, and it wasn't a nightmare. I shouldn't say it that delightedly, but I'm kind of delighted because the developers and the Diablo team seem to have taken the feedback from the PTR, which has been discussed in a previous episode of the Season 5 PTR being a bit of a mess. They took the feedback and they fixed things. They improved them, and then we had a smooth launch. And it took, let's see, we are in August now as of the date of recording. So it took us roughly 4 seasons to get here, and 14 months, or we'll say 13 months based on when season 1 started. But what excites me even more about this is that for the first time, they're implementing a new endgame feature in the Infernal Hordes, and the seasonal theme itself kind of builds you up to the experience of the entire new feature. So as you're progressing through the seasonal quest line in Season 5, season is starting to feel like not a real word at this point. But as you progress through the quest line, you're going to encounter Hellbreach dungeons. And the Hellbreach dungeons are a taste of what you're going to experience in the actual Infernal Horde event. Now, the Infernal Hordes are much more like the Nightmare events that got added into Diablo 3. They're timed waves. You're going to have 60 seconds to clear each of them. And the Hellbreach dungeons are not quite that intense yet, but you're still getting to experience the new Boon and Bane system of the Infernal Offerings, where you have the option to make your experience harder for greater rewards. And it's definitely, it's working. There's a the penultimate, the final Infernal Offering that you pick up before facing the final boss increases their damage by 50% for something like 3 times the currency that you get, the burning aether that you get as you're progressing, and those open the spoils of hell chests at the end. And he wiped the floor with me the first time. Now, given I was level 8. So, I didn't.
You gotta start somewhere.
You gotta start somewhere. I did not have my full skeleton army at my back. So, but I went back in there as part of the quest line and took him out, and it felt great. And I'm genuinely excited because this is giving players a taste of what's going to come and what they're going to be farming as part of their endgame experience, post level 50 when they unlock Infernal Hordes. That was a lot of words all at once.
It was. But very informative. I'll be honest, I haven't really been keeping up on Diablo 4 as of recently because there's been so many other things happening. So that was a nice little summarization as far as I'm concerned. Have either of you other two been playing Diablo 4 at all? Liz, have you touched it? Corey, have you touched it at all?
I have touched it.
I played up to level 15, so I am definitely an expert on this game. Maybe in a few more levels.
Corey?
I was kind of.
Oh, go ahead, Liz.
I was a little surprised. I was a little surprised by the smooth launch, like Liz said, because Diablo 4 has been doing a PTR, but it's such a short testing period that the launch always seems to be a little rocky. One thing that they did that I think probably made a significant difference is that they rolled out the patch for download an hour before it was available, because usually the season ends and the season starts at the same time, and the patch is only available right at season start time. And I think that just slams the servers too much. Only having it available an hour in advance seems like a little bit tight, but I wonder if that kind of made the difference this time, and we had a pretty smooth season rollout.
It's always nice when a plan comes together.
It is.
Especially when it comes to Diablo, because your plans are going to go the way of the dodo really fast.
Well, anything... Go ahead, Corey.
Play a lot of the last season, and maybe too much of the last season, but
there's no such thing.
You're right. I wasn't quite as... I've seen people further progress than I was. I still couldn't take down Mommy Lilith by myself by the end of it. So, there's people that can and carry other people through it. But I'm looking forward to a new season. I like a new endgame activity because between dungeons and grinding Helltides, and the pit was kind of getting old. So having another thing to do is going to be nice. And I do like the idea of killing lots of demons and seeing our good friend the Butcher back, because while he was scary in the beginning of Diablo 4, he's kind of lost some of that terror that he could inspire in you. And so hopefully this new burning Butcher that seems to be in all the key art for the new season will be super strong and scary.
You can only hear fresh meat in a dungeon so many times before you're just like, yeah, get it over with.
I mean, I still have flashbacks of like the very first time encountering the Butcher in Diablo in general. It still triggers a visceral response in me.
It's the Diablo equivalent of the Fell Reaver sound.
Yes, it is. But anything else we should know about Season 5 with Infernal Hordes? Or is anything else upcoming with it that we should note?
Yeah.
I would like to know what the most powerful, like from what you've seen going into it, what do you think the most powerful class is going to be? Can you speculate on that?
Liz,
Rogues.
do you want to speculate first or no? I actually disagree.
It's rogues. Rogues are okay. They aren't always the most powerful class, but they're sneaky little things, and they can do a lot of damage, and they move really fast. So usually at the end game, people who can get in there and farm really quickly, get through those dungeons faster because they have more movement speed, a lot of the times those classes kind of wind up near the top. And unfortunately, my favorite class, the Necromancer, is kind of lower down right now, and it is the class with the least movement speed abilities, so it always kind of slogs slowly through dungeons. And very sad, very sad. I can only take comfort from my army of skeleton friends.
I am going to disagree with Liz. I think we are going to see some utterly sparktacular, sorcerers come out of Season 5. I think that they're going to shine this season, and we're experiencing honestly a bit of a cycle, very similar to the Diablo 3 seasons, where depending on whose turn it is with the buff stick, that class gets some major juice. Just last season it was the minion necromancer. Prior to that, barbarians were surprisingly very strong. I'm not sure when druid's gonna get a turn, though. They keep snatching the stick away from our werebear.
Yeah,
and
they just don't want me. They just don't want me to ever play the
brutal.
game. Is really what it boils
They
down to.
don't. They truly
Right?
don't. But I would point out, since you asked for notables, that one, it's very important to remember, we only have 2 months to complete this season, because Vessel of Hatred is going to mark the season 6 start. The other gotcha to keep in mind right now is that we did say surprisingly bug free, and that's in part because the one bug that showed up is actually a buff for everybody that's experiencing it, which is that some players have all of their Eternal Realm tempering recipes showing up. We don't know yet how they're going to fix this, and if you've already applied those tempering recipes, whether or not you're going to then lose that temper. That would hurt, but at the same time, you the folks that can grind the hardest on day one and get all the materials to then apply the temper are going to have the natural advantage. So is that necessarily fair? Is it balanced? And I guess most importantly, for a 2-month season, how much do we care?
Their community manager, Adam Fletcher, our good buddy, has remarked upon the tempering, and he says that it's not the original design or intention. So he says that he wouldn't expect this for future seasons, but they are letting it slide for season 5.
Oh, see, there you go. So if you're kicking off early, you're going to have a bit of a boost to your start, so long as you're willing to put in the hours to grind materials.
I always find
gold.
I always find the time before an expansion for any game a fascinating, like, I don't want to call it a dead spot. I'll just call it a weird spot, because each game reacts differently, right? So, like, in a MMO for the pre-expansion releases and the time between, we've been sort of conditioned, especially with like World of Warcraft, that there's going to be a lead-in event, and there's going to be something that draws you back into the game, and it's going to make you want to play, and it directly leads into the release of the expansion, right? It gets you prepped for it in a lot of different ways, whether it's the new systems or whatever the case is. Diablo never really had that. And like, even with seasons, like with Diablo 3 seasons and now Diablo 4 seasons, it doesn't really, like, I'm surprised that they didn't take the opportunity here to make something, like, make the season, with it being so close to the release of the expansion, feed directly into the expansion. I'm very surprised by that.
Well, it might. I don't want to give away spoilers, because we're still getting our little dribbles of story in each season, and I do think that the seasonal theme, although very encapsulated in the theme, it still kind of ties into the overarching, I should say, overarching progression of hatred throughout Sanctuary. What is Mephisto doing? Kind of following along Nerel's flight in his Soulstone, and how does that tie in to what we're currently experiencing in Season 5?
Yeah, I mean, you may be right there, but also, and this is me just being maybe hypercritical, so feel free to ignore me. Or yell at me in the comments. Either one. That's fine. But I would feel like if that was the intent, that at least me, would be advertising it more as like a lead-in event, not necessarily just another season. And most of what I'm seeing is they're just sort of advertising it as just another season. So
yeah, it feels less like a liminal space season, like that. I feel like at the end of the day, season 4 of Dragonflight with the Awakened raids and season 4 of Diablo 4 with Loot Reborn, they felt like pauses.
Yeah, fair. So, completely fair. But speaking of that pre-patch or pre-expansion goodness, World of Warcraft is not without events happening or news and items that we should probably discuss as well. On the day of this recording, we have a new cinematic that was released, and it was a cinematic, but it's kind of in that I don't know what like the Harbingers
and Warbringers
and Warbringers animation style, right?
The stop motion almost, but with drawing.
Like, animated comic is what it's called in, like, I believe for like everywhere, or motion comics is what it is. This one was the Threads of Destiny, which sets up our void-based troubles, and does a number of things, like introduces us with the Azj-Kahet and the Nerubar Palace. What did you all think about it? Because I definitely have thoughts. We'll start with Liz Prime.
It felt very familiar. It felt very similar to some previous storylines we've seen, and I'm sort of wondering, okay, where's the surprise? Where's the excitement here? Not that it isn't beautifully done with great voice acting, but it's kind of like, this feels like some stories I've seen in the past.
I do get the Talanji and Rastakhan. No, was it Rastakhan? King Rastakhan?
Yeah.
There's definitely parallels there between your two spider people and your troll people, but whereas Talanji was like, you know what, I'm not going to kill my dad. On the other hand, spoilers: Spider Princess kills Spider Queen. So yeah, I guess they're not going to be our friends anytime soon.
Okay, I'm going to channel my inner Matt here for a moment and kind of bring him into this. I mean, I watched this and my first thought was, oh no, here I go making a Faustian deal again. Like, and I'm not the only one. Like, I've heard other people say that too. And I'm not bagging on it or saying that it's a negative thing. It's just, WoW has this thing where occasionally it just runs into cycles. And Faustian deals seems to be an eternal thing here. We've had this happen how many times? How many times have we made a deal, or somebody's made a deal with a higher power only to be betrayed later? We saw it all throughout, Wrath of the Lich King. We saw it through all of Legion. We saw it through all of Battle for Azeroth. We saw it all through Shadowlands. Like, literally, this is sort of like the bread and butter of it, which is why everybody's kind of like, oh, this just feels sort of familiar. It's cool that it's Xalatath, but I really am hoping that the story of the actual expansion is more than just oops, all Faustians all the way down, because it was a little, I'm reticent to say disappointing, but it didn't give me the same emotional impact as like Daughter of the Sea or
come on,
no question.
You can't compare Daughter of the Sea to anything that doesn't also have a banger of a sea shanty in it. It's in 17 different languages around the world, and also my first ever post for BlizzardWatch.com. That's impossible.
Or let's talk about how, at least for me, the feels of watching Arthas walk forward in the in Icecrown, raising Icecrown Citadel, while the voice of King Tyrannus plays over his march. Like, these are moments that sort of like have impact. Yes, there are elements of those Faustian deals that are like that come back with it. There are these ideas of like almost like cyclical loss, as well as like, just pain and suffering, but there's such emotional impact behind them. And this really, I don't know if it's just an artifact of this expansion in particular. After everything that we went through in Dragonflight, I'm not feeling much of an emotional impact leading into this one, right?
I think it would be if they had focused more on the struggle of the spider people. Like, if obviously you need another minute of cinematic for that, which gets expensive. But if they'd shown like the detriments to the Spider Kingdom of after they reject the old god's offer, and the queen is like, you know what, we're going to go off and do our own thing. Thanks, but no thanks. So from that point, there's supposed to be that big decline in Spider Kingdom, which leads the princess to her eventual matricide. Yeah, okay, sure. If you want us to feel for the queen as a noble figure that's trying to protect her people, you need to show us that, and you need to show us how, as a result of the queen's decisions, the Spider Kingdom has suffered. And yeah, we see some like starving spider people held back by a wall of guards, sure, but we don't see the decay of their society as much.
Yeah, not only that, like, why are they starving? Why are they not? I understand that, like, that gives away a lot of it, but, like, there's no indication of the plight. There's no indication of how much time has passed. It's an odd little set piece. And I also think that the timing of it is a little short. Like, I feel like things like this, especially with us, I mean, we're what, 3 weeks away from release, give or take, at the time of this recording?
Yeah.
Yep.
So
22nd is the first day, which is of early access, which is just 2.5 weeks.
Yep. And then 3 weeks after, and then we literally the week after that, like 4 days after that, that Monday it releases, right? Or is it Tuesday? Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday. So 3 weeks it releases. I would have expected a little bit more sort of leading up to it, especially because, and maybe this is the segue point because I'm clever like that occasionally. Our current event with the Radiant Echoes, I don't know about you guys. I've sort of found it I don't want to say uninspiring. I find it sort of unengaging. It just feels more of the same of what we've already experienced. So, and I'll throw it back to you guys.
I wrote a breakfast topic about the Radiant Echoes event, and it just feels samey. And this is the third pre-launch event that we've gotten that is all basically the same kind of thing. You go to a place and you kill a guy, and then you kill a boss, and then you do it again a half hour later, or an hour later, or 90 minutes later, whatever the time frame of the event is. You're still just traveling from A to B to C to D, killing a thing and getting a piece of loot. And I understand that not every event is going to be the launch of the Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King, event where you have the zombie plague and everyone remembers it fondly, or even the Cataclysm launch where sure it was a little messy, but at least you got the Theramore Siege scenario out of it. So it felt like they were trying something there, and I would say that the current Radiant Echo event suffers from maybe, I don't want to call it laziness, but just they're stuck in a rut.
I actually, I'm going to throw out a counter there, in that I do agree it feels samey. You know, it's very, very similar to the experience we had with the pre-expansion event to Dragonflight. But compare that to what we had for Shadowlands, where you were just roaming around Icecrown.
Oh,
True.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, at a certain point, you stopped roaming and you only waited for the guy that dropped the big egg.
Exactly. Hands down, prefer this.
I mean, and I guess there's merit to that, and that's definitely the devil's advocate for it. But I'll go back to Cory brought this up again, and I mean, I can't help but compare this sort of milestone here because this is a milestone expansion, right? This is the start of a 3-part cycle that's supposed to be a whole new story arc. And maybe this is me being too close to just media in general, like comics and TV shows and things like that. But when you're moving from one major arc to another, whether it's the Marvel Cinematic Universe or, you know, whether it's a season of Supernatural or whatever your flavor of nerd consumption is, you usually have a grand setup to sort of bring you into that arc. And I kind of expected, and maybe this is my own fault, I kind of expected something closer to the lead up to Icecrown Citadel and Wrath of the Lich King, because Wrath of the Lich King started a whole new era. Cataclysm started a whole new era. And the pre-release events the pre-expansion events for those were substantial and directly led you into sort of the stories that were coming, but did so in a way that made it a little more engaging. And maybe it was the time frames, maybe it was a little tighter, or maybe it was just because I was younger and looking at it with like more exuberant enthusiasm. But now I'm looking at it, it's like, this doesn't really feel like it's telling me or making me really care about moving into the next expansion. Like, cool, I go and I talk and I have a cinematic with a couple named characters. Cool, I go see another cinematic with another named character. Cool, I'm not participating in this at all anymore. I'm now removed from the story. I'm no longer the hero involved in everything. I'm almost feels like I'm taking a back seat again to, you know, Thrall once more, and like, and having an event that doesn't really give me something to really to do besides go on patrol while the big heroes are doing who knows what, doesn't really help.
Can I toss out a because you actually mentioned a facet that I think makes for a very good parallel, which is the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because we're not coming into the War Within as this is a fresh. It's not Star Wars: A New Hope. It's not like we've never seen WoW before. This is still, we're still the heroes of Azeroth for the umpteenth time, right? And so it's less like Star Wars: A New Hope and more like going into Age of Ultron or going into Infinity War? Yes, Infinity War. Where I think, and this may be a little naysay, but I think we're going to feel like these kickoffs are maybe a little more anticlimactic, at least for this one and maybe for Midnight. But then my hope is that by the last Titan, it's going to have that big oomph building into it. And the point of the expansions is to ramp us to that. That's my hope. I don't know if it's going to met, but I mean, think about how you went into, Age of Ultron might have been a bad comparison depending on how you feel about it. But think about how you went into Endgame versus how you went into Infinity War.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's some truth to that, but also we're comparing maybe apples to oranges a little bit there too. I don't know. I hope you're right, and I hope we get some build up that leads into some like big pivotal event. But also, when you're doing something that's long form, and anybody who, I mean, I'm talking to a room full of writers here. Anybody who's written anything, you have to have a hook. You have to have something that makes somebody interested. And it also feels like a really interesting decision if they're waiting for the big build up, because now is the time to try to draw old players back and new players to it as a natural jumping on point, especially if you're doing an arc. So give them a reason to install and start playing now, or at least get the old players to come back to bring them into your 3 expansion cycle to sort of get your hooks in them. Give them those little tiny pieces of candy until you throw the soapbox over them. But like, you got to throw the pieces of candy out. You can't just say, that's a piece of candy. No, that's a rock. I can see that's a rock. No, it's really a piece of candy. Like, you actually have to put the candy down. So go ahead.
I do wonder, is the candy in this instance story? Because we're also, I would say, pretty collectively hooked on story. Or is the candy the fast leveling?
Yeah,
they definitely improved that.
I would say that the fast leveling is always a facet of pre-expansion. There's never been a pre-expansion where we have not had accelerated leveling, so I can't necessarily give it full points for that, if that makes sense.
I think
jumping in.
Yeah, I do think there's another way to look at it. I think this event has kind of an alternate purpose, which is to celebrate this is the year of World of Warcraft's 20th anniversary, and I believe it's the year of Warcraft's 30th anniversary. Am I right there? I think I'm right there.
Time? What is time?
Yeah, what is time?
A miserable pile of secrets.
No, that's a man.
That's for sure. But this event is kind of a celebration of Azeroth's history. We're going back and experiencing Azeroth's memories. And we're participating in all of these little activities and objectives that are pulled from Azeroth's past. That may be punting gnomes. That may be carrying beer to dwarves across ice physics, which is the worst objective in this entire event. Don't do it. Don't be fooled. Don't do that one. Move on. We may be fighting Hogger. We may be fighting Stitches. This is a celebration of 20 years of World of Warcraft. Now, the question of whether this is a good and valuable celebration it's a good question, because I think it's interesting and fun, and I think they've created a ton of little activities, and they all have that little nostalgia hit for people who have been playing for a long time. We get to fight Ragnaros and Onyxia, and Onyxia still has all of those Onyxia mechanics, which...
many whelps.
Oh, many whelps.
Many whelps. You get to fight the Lich King, but I think Onyxia is the star here. So, I feel like this is an anniversary celebration here, and maybe it's not
right.
ideal.
let's be honest, Nixie is only the star because they were cowards. They didn't give Hogger his full group wiping ability.
And you may be right there, but maybe marketing should lean into that then too.
Yeah.
And we talk about the anti-hype train a lot and how hype can be ruinous for things. But this is like an instance where, like, if you start hyping up, celebrate the 20 years of World of Warcraft with this pre-expansion event that celebrates the milestones, like start pushing it like that early, that generates more interest and more hype. And they really, it's possible that I missed it, but I haven't seen that.
So here's a little tinfoil hat kind of moment. As Liz was talking just now, thinking about, like, this is our big kickoff to the next chapter of World of Warcraft, the launch into the World Soul saga that Chris Metzen himself stood on stage and brought us all into and announced 3 expansions at once, the first for the game, and just a real ballsy move. And so, but looking at this event, it's kind of a little lackluster. Sure, there's some nods back to classic and Wrath content, but do you think that maybe there's a world, maybe one universe over, where Remist was the launch event, and for 3 weeks we just went and farmed bronze with our main in Pandaria, where that big capstone of, like, hey, the Infinite Dragonflight's messing with things, let's stop them, and then, oh, by the way, maybe there's some old gaudiness with the Harbinger and Xal'atath along the way that you kind of interact with, but for 3 weeks go back and play Remist in your main without, like, launching a separate instance of WoW could have been a thing. It seems plausible in my mind as I'm thinking about it now for all of a minute.
Like, maybe that would have been a better tie-in, and maybe that's, like, I've been thinking about this often too with Remix. I really like the WoW remix, and to be fair, they've done stuff to make people want to play it a little bit more too, with getting extra bronze by using the Warband map to get the Everywhere All at Once achievement, which is basically every fully explored zone becomes essentially you get 3,000 bronze, and all of your folks everywhere all of your tunes on your account get to see all the map that you've revealed. Like, that's a really cool item. That's like a really cool thing. And WoW Remix was, I think they knocked it out of the park with it. They made a very compelling experience to go back and experience one of WoW's best expansions, some of its most compelling storytelling, and giving players a really interesting opportunity to experience classes in a way that they haven't before, by essentially leveraging something that they're doing from WoW Classic with, like, the Seasons of Discovery, and giving us the ability to essentially socket in other classes' powers and customize our character build. And then all while doing that with, you're tagging along with the Infinite Dragonflight, having that tied into some story elements that led into, hey, we're chasing the Harbinger. We've been chasing the Harbinger since the events of this dungeon that you spent a whole heck of a lot of time in, called the Dawn of the Infinites. Like, you spent so much time there. This is what helped get us on your side. Now we need to help chase her down. This is where we wound up. Go forth and don't mess with the time stream too much, and have those little moments of, like, Xal'atath popping up here and there trying to do stuff with the Mogu, or messing with the raids or something like that. Like, I'm not saying they could have, or they should have done, like, the same thing that they're doing with, like, Mythic Plus dungeons, but they could have maybe introduced some of that as well. Like, maybe Xal'atath agitates the mobs a little bit, makes them hit a little bit harder, or whatever. I'm not a programmer as far as working on that stuff goes. I know that this is an enormous effort. All of this is just pie in the sky, like, things that I think would have been maybe a little bit cooler than taking a tour and beating up some memories. So
yeah, definitely. Now, and especially if they had opened it up, so, like, almost like the rotation where time walking, like, if they had made it similar to that, where you're remisting, or I should say remixing in this instance, Miss Pandaria this week or these couple of weeks, and then you go back further and further and further, like, that could have been incredible. It would also have been a phenomenal effort. I can't even imagine the amount of time that would have gone into that.
Sure. Now, not to say that they're not giving you something for your efforts in this pre-expansion event. So who wants to tell me about this heirloom ring?
Well, there's an heirloom ring, and it's one of the things I think is odd is that Blizzard barely mentions that there's an heirloom ring. You kind of have to figure it out for yourself, because as you do the events, you get these memories that drop. And you can combine 20 memories into an essence. And then you can combine 3 essences with a stone ring you buy off the events vendor to make a new heirloom ring. And of course, there aren't a whole lot of heirloom rings in the game, and this is a very easy one to make. You need 20 memories from each of the 3 event zones. So that's Dragonblight, Searing Gorge, and Duskwallow Marsh. So you need to do the events in each zone. You may have to do them a few times to collect that many memories. And then you combine them with an item that you just buy off the vendor for 25 of the event currency, which is really easy to get. You'll definitely have that much. And you got a new ring. You have an heirloom ring to use on all of your alts, leveling, moving forward. And it's a nice little reward. I'm just surprised that Blizzard has made it a slightly hidden reward. They haven't hyped it up at all. No one mentions it in game. You only realize that it's a thing because you have these drops that suggest you can do something with them. And that's a little weird. But
we do like in Discovery, right?
I guess so. Maybe they were inspired by Season of Discovery. It's like, okay, go out there and find this.
Discover your rewards.
But the event is very rewarding and has actually received a lot of changes since it was launched. It's only been around for a week, but it's already been overhauled after, I think, kind of some player complaints that said it was too slow, it was too grindy, it was difficult to make the event, because originally it spawned every 90 minutes, and there was an encounter where you finished a bunch of memory objectives, and then you killed a boss, and of course, with the typical pace of World of Warcraft players, that meant the event started and it was over in about 5 minutes because everyone rushed in there, burned through the objectives, killed the boss, and if you weren't there when they did that, you missed the event. There were mobs you could grind for currency, but you basically missed the best way to get reputation, currency, and all the event rewards if you weren't there in the first 5 minutes of the event.
We all do love that word, grind.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a bummer. So they've significantly changed the event. Now it spawns once an hour on the hour, and you go in, you finish these memory objectives, and then you have a boss spawn, you kill the boss, you complete the event, you turn in your quest. But as soon as you kill the boss, the event starts again with more memory objectives to play through and earn rewards from. And so you have this endless cycle. So it doesn't matter if you aren't there at the very first 5 minutes of the event, because that was really frustrating. If you weren't watching the clock and being really aggressive about it, you could miss the whole thing. And now it's much easier to participate in. It's much easier and faster to get rewards. So you can get great item level 480 transmog, or gear for alts. Like all those alts we're leveling up in WoW Remix. This is going to be a good upgrade for them to get them started in the War Within. You also get flight stones and crests that you can use to upgrade that gear, because originally it dropped the gear and the gear's all upgradable, but you didn't get any of the items to upgrade it. And those items are one of the things that you cannot transfer around your warband. So if you were gearing up an alt, they were in trouble. They'd get the gear, but they had nothing to upgrade it with. So the event is 100% better than it was on launch. It's easier to participate in. It's got more rewards. It's more fun. So if anyone out there tried it when it launched and was like, this is super boring, it's going to take me 10 years to get all the rewards, and the event is only for 3 more weeks, go back and give it another try, because it really is good gear. The event moves pretty fast, and if you, like me, have been leveling a lot of alts through Remix, you're probably going to want to gear them up. And this is an easy way to do it.
Okay, good to know. I think there's one last thing that we want to talk about before we call it a day here, and that is the new team that is being formed at Blizzard. This is something that I actually didn't know about until, we posted about it. Which is Microsoft formed a new team within Blizzard to work on AA games, which are based on Blizzard franchises. AA games is something that we talk about AAA games, which are like the major studios. The Activision Blizzard is one of them. EA, formerly like Bethesda, would have been considered in there. Like they produce like big blockbuster, like tent post games. AA titles are stuff that are like smaller teams still using IPs generated from them, but usually a smaller scale, smaller budget. This is stuff like what Microsoft did with Halo, which was developer 343i, I think.
343, yeah.
Yeah. Smaller games like Sea of Thieves, which is a smaller game, not technically a AAA title in terms of budget or team size, and those do really well. And Microsoft seems pretty adept at singling those out. The only thing that I thought was interesting is that most of the people that seem to be being repurposed for it are from the King subsidiary of Activision Blizzard King, which are the group behind the free mobile games. Candy Crush Saga, stuff like that. So I guess the question is, what do you guys think of this? Are you afraid of this? Does this excite you? Do you think we're going to see interesting things, or do we think we're going to see, I mean, I get one per show, so I'm going to use it here. Do you think we're going to see a bastardization of some of the older IPs that we haven't seen in a while? Do you think we're going to get like some weird mobile version of StarCraft? That StarCraft's coming back. Oops, it's a free mobile game. Don't pay attention to the monetization. Just put your credit card in. Or do you think... God.
I have an idea that is going to make Cory hyperventilate. I would love
Heroes
to
of the
see...
Storm, right?
Yeah, it's Heroes of the Storm in the style of Warcraft Rumble.
Bringing it full circle, since Heroes of the Storm started as a Dota map.
Exactly. That I mean, come on. Like you were talking about Kerrigan and the Zerg tie-ins, and could you just see them in that adorable little I can't think of the StarCraft 2 StarCraft Artanis? No.
Go.
Gosh, that's it's going to escape me. The Protoss. But could you just see them?
Yeah.
Oh, I did get it right.
Yeah.
Could you just see them as those adorable little minis? and they would have to rework it. Well, I don't know how much you would have to rework it other than maybe making it a 2-laner instead of a 3-lane. So we'd get Battlefield of Eternity, which was my favorite map to begin with. But give it to me. Give that to me. Give me StarCraft Mobile. Put it all in my veins. Shut up and take my money. Insert meme here.
Liz Prime, do you have thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm anti-hype. I don't like getting hyped up in advance because that inevitably leads to disappointment 100% of the time. So I can't be excited about this, and I can't be not excited about this. We don't know what they're working on. We don't know what properties they're going to use. We don't necessarily know that it's going to be a mobile game just because King developers are going to be involved. I mean, Blizzard has made mobile games. King has made mobile games, but maybe they're doing something different. We don't know. And until we know anything, I can't pass judgment. I think there are a lot of cool things they could be doing, and I'm gonna hope that that's what they're doing. And if they make a game that I hate, that is a horrible microtransaction, free-to-play, whatever, then okay, well, it didn't hurt me that they're releasing another game that I'm not going to play. I have plenty of games to play. So I'm going to hope for the best, but I'm also not getting my hopes up.
So I'm with you. I'm with you on the I don't want to get my hopes up. I've thought about this in terms of spiritual successor games. So we've seen this time again where a game will be left to linger, or an IP will be left to linger by a developer, only to be picked up and spiritually succeeded by another company or people that were formerly of that developer that decided to make their own game in that genre. Look at Castlevania, particularly we saw, and Cory, I don't know if you remember the developer because I feel like you're one of the people that would correct me on this, but he created Bloodstained, and he created it because nobody was making that game anymore. There wasn't a Metroidvania being released recently that filled all those gaps that players still clearly wanted. So he just went out and did it himself, and not only spawned a spiritual successor to Symphony of the Night, but several clones in that vein that started with, I guess you call them demakes, like 8-bit, 16-bit 2D versions of those games as well, that started coming out and that have been coming out rather frequently, many of which were, I think one of which was recently highlighted in this summer Games Done Quick as well. There's always room for those IPs or successors of those IPs or other places. Here, Blizzard has a unique opportunity, instead of waiting for somebody else to resurrect those, to have internal employees work on something to resurrect those in whatever way they need. Like, we talked a lot about when is StarCraft going to be coming back? When is Warcraft, not World of Warcraft, Warcraft, when are the RTSs going to come back to Blizzard, who originally like made RTSs like the bee's knees at the time? This is an opportunity for that, right?
That is the opportunity. Yeah. Don't put the hopes of an entire genre on them and make them a AAA game, but just release a fun
that's
AA kind of scope RTS. That could be fun, which I would say is totally plausible for Blizzard, except all of their best RTS designers went off and just did that, and they made Stormgate, which is the most StarCraft to ever not be called StarCraft. And there's no knock against it. It looks like it's fantastically made, but you've got your Zerg and your Protoss and your Terrans, and they've shared their art asset library. It looks like, obviously not. They've designed their own things, but those are Zerg and all but name, except now they've got demon skins, so they've got a little Diablo in their peanut butter, and they've got Protoss, but they're not Protoss, they're angels kind of thing.
But you hit the nail on the head, right? Like, that's what I'm going for, is like, you can do, just because it's AA and just because these are formerly mobile developers or mobile focused developers, to Liz's point, it doesn't mean that they can't produce something that has mass appeal, right? You have a smaller budget. You don't necessarily have the other aspect that I think is important about this too is deadlines. One of the things that I think is a massive difference between AAA and AA generally doesn't come with a whole lot of deadlines attached to it. It tends to be a more let it cook until it's done and then release it to the wild, because it doesn't have that high budget. It doesn't have a super high profile. It doesn't have a lot of, like, for lack of a better term, shareholder or like eyes on it. And it lets you just kind of do things at a smaller scale, longer term. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to make it go forever. Obviously, you want to release it at some point, but AAA games have an expectation about them. And we've talked about this on the show in the past heck, last week we talked about Mass Effect 3 at length, and how that was a game that needed more time in the oven, right? It needed another few months of polish to finish recording or putting in what was already storyboarded out to make it really worthwhile, but they had to hit that deadline. How many games suffered from that? AA doesn't come with that same pressure, so you can kind of just cook on things and release it to the wild, and when it's done, it's done. I mean, heck, Tencent and Riot did this with their Riot Labs. That was essentially their AA version, right? Smaller scale games. Go ahead.
What you consider No Man's Sky to be, because I feel like No Man's Sky was a game that, I guess, but it was also
he was how many people worked on that, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that was a shoestring budget over a term of like a really long period of time, and it released awfully, right?
It sure did. But amazingly, and I don't know how they've managed to pull this off, because no one else gets this opportunity, it feels like. No Man's Sky has released years of free patches that have made it into a game that is like worthy of putting on the pedestal of what that launch No Man's Sky promised.
That's kind of the joy and the excitement of independent games, or even AA games. The difference with a AA game and an independent game, Hello Games is their own boss, right? Like, they're not owned by somebody else. They do their thing. They've done their thing fully with this. The only downside is it's a AA still under Blizzard.
And that actually, and I promise this will be a quick thought, but it also dodges something that I hadn't really considered first, is that a lot of these titles suffer, I think, not only from shareholder expectations, but from the too big to fail mentality. We've invested so much time, money, resource, and effort into this title that, unless it's a massive success, we'll never recoup anything. I think that at AA, you have a lot less pressure there.
Maybe, yeah, right. Like that's what I was kind of trying to get at. So thank you very much for that. You might not have that pressure. Like that's why things like No Man's Sky was, even though it had pressure, it was pressure from consumers. It wasn't pressure from a corporate entity saying, you didn't return our investment 10,000 times. So maybe, who knows?
I would love to see like the return to the super creative, like groundbreaking Blizzard. And maybe if AA gives them that opportunity to innovate rather than just kind of chase trends that have existed for 5 years that you see in AAA gaming, because you can't invest that kind of money in anything that's not going to be a sure thing, then maybe we'll see the next great hit come out of it.
I mean, and not to, I don't want to end it on a down note, but the other side of that coin is also still in play as well, as it's eternally tumbling towards landing on the ground. It could also just be a series of gacha games that they release over the course of years. So it could go either way. So to Liz's point, best not to get our hopes up too high.
No, too late, sky high.
If I were going to hope for anything, it would be StarCraft Ghost. That was a game I would have loved to see, kind of taking a different look at some of these StarCraft characters in a different kind of game and telling us some more background story for StarCraft or side stories to StarCraft that we never got to see because we're so focused on building our bases so we are not victim to the next Zergling rush. And there's room to do stuff. I think there's a lot of room in the StarCraft universe to make games, and you don't necessarily have to make a huge blockbuster AAA game for it to be a fun game. I think there are possibilities here. Not get my hopes up too high, but there are some things I would love to see, and they might be working on things like that.
Well, we can hope, and hope springs eternal. But, friends, Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous contributions at patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that this podcast lighting community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to our podcast, better chance at having your question answered on our podcast for the queue, and an ads-free site experience. If you have questions for this or any of our shows, please be sure to send those in. You can send it to podcast@blizzardwatch.com, specify the show that it is for in the subject line, as well as any special pronunciations for your name. If you don't want to send us an email, you can hit us up on Discord. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is open for everybody. Same rules apply. If you are a Patreon supporter, however, you can hit our Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, where we will always look for first as a way of saying thank you for helping us keep the lights on. So we didn't get to any questions this week, and I apologize. There was a lot to get through. I do want to thank both Cory and Liz for joining us today, really rounding us out, and I had a lot of fun today, so thank you very much for joining us.
You're very welcome. And I don't know that there was necessarily so much to get through, but you made the mistake of letting me just ramble, so that's on you.
Mistake or strategic planning? All right, friends. But with that, we will see you next week.